The timeline unfolding in Niger has become one of the most consequential geopolitical shifts on the continent. The announcement on 1st December 2025 that Niger intends to place uranium from the SOMAIR mine onto the open international market sent a wave of shock across governments, energy alliances, and long-established global players. The timing, the tone, and the firmness behind the decision raised one question: has a new era of resource sovereignty arrived in the Sahel? Before going deeper into the implications of this development, viewers are encouraged to like, share, and subscribe for more analytical updates that break down the major power moves shaping global politics today. The central government in Niamey, led by General Abdourahmane Chiani, moved with an unusual level of authority and certainty when revealing its new uranium trade direction. For decades, uranium from Niger has operated under tightly controlled frameworks shaped by external entities. The 3rd December announcement signals an attempt to redefine those structures. The legal, geopolitical, and diplomatic implications are immense. It raises questions about who ultimately controls African natural resources and whether established powers ever expected an African state to unilaterally assert such economic freedom. Could this shift represent a wider continental awakening? And how will long-standing partners adapt to a landscape where African states refuse to play by old rules? The decision to take the uranium to the open market essentially challenges the traditional buyer's monopoly and upends the assumption that African commodities must move through predetermined channels. Observers are now wondering what this means for global energy pricing, especially nuclear energy supply chains dependent on Nigerian yellowcake.
Well, Niger says that it is putting uranium produced at a mine run by a subsidiary of a huge French fuel company on the international market. The country's military leaders removed Orano's operational control of 3 of its main mines last year. About a quarter of the uranium supplied to Europe's nuclear power plants come from Niger, and the site in question could produce around 1,300 tons of uranium concentrate, which is worth around 250 million euros. Take a look.
Uranium, a highly sought-after element mined from deep in the Earth's crust, is at the centre of a rift between Niger's military regime and the French nuclear firm Orano. On Sunday, Niger's state television announced that the country's reserves, produced by SOMAIR, will be put on the international market, citing the ruling junta's chief.
Niger claims its legitimate right to dispose of its natural riches to sell them to whoever wants to buy them under the rules of the market in complete independence.
SOMAIR was a subsidiary of Orano, which is 90% owned by the French government, until the junta nationalised it in June. It has been in the military regime's line of sight since it came to power in a coup in 2023. In December 2024, Orano admitted it had lost control of its 3 uranium mines in the country and has since filed several international arbitration proceedings against Niger. Russia, too, has entered the fray. In July, Moscow's energy minister said it was also interested in mining Niger's uranium. Orano still retains a 60% stake in subsidiaries and announced in September that a tribunal had ruled in its favour and had ordered Niger not to sell uranium produced by SOMAIR. The ongoing tensions are part of the deterioration in relations between Niger's leadership and the former French colonial power.
Well, for more on this story, we're joined by our international affairs editor, Angela Diffley. Angela, France and the European Union, they're not delighted by this news, are they?
They're not delighted, no. As the president of Niger says, the general who is leading the junta there, this is our uranium. We will sell it to whom we want, as we wish, when we want. And that is the reality. It's true that this idea that some of it has already been seen. There are reports in international media that some uranium has already been taken to Togo, that it will from there go to Russia. These are reports in international media. in some ways, the Americans, the International Atomic Agency, would prefer Russia than Iran, which is one of the other possibilities. If it's going on the international market, France has no way, Europe has no way, nobody else has any way of stopping Niger selling that uranium to whomsoever it wants. What is also worrying is that in order to get from Niger to Togo in West Africa, or to the coast there, it has to cross several areas which are controlled by jihadists, and that in itself is a real security worry for the European Union, for France, that somehow jihadists might get their hands on that uranium as it travels. But the reality is that that is the position we're in. They have chosen to sell it to Russia. Increasingly, as we know, Russia has an important influence in Africa. It is helping many of these former French colonies in their fight against jihadists. Experts don't see their efforts being any more or less successful than the French efforts, but that is what's happening. In France, about 20% of France's own uranium needed for civil nuclear reactors came from Niger. So both France and the European Union are trying to find other avenues of supply because it's an important resource which now has become very complicated to access.
And this is yet more evidence of how French influence, soft power and commercial interests have plummeted in Africa recently, isn't it?
Yeah, it's such a long way from when this happens every time there is a new French president. There is an attempt to reset relations with Africa in various different ways, ranging from not long after independence to we will work together, we're equals, to further along French presidents saying, we understand you think we're too paternalistic, we need to be more equal, to Emmanuel Macron at the beginning of his presidency saying, we must make this relationship much more about commercial interests. We're all equals again. And it is such a long way from those speeches he gave at the beginning of his presidency. France is disliked in much of West Africa and Central Africa, where it was the former colonial power. Much of this, it is true, there has been some of it that has been deliberately stirred by Russian propaganda, but there does appear to be a dislike of France in that area for whatever reason. It is very useful for various West African and Central African governments where France was the former colonial power to use France as a scapegoat. That is a classic situation. But for a number of reasons, it is easy to do something that will anger France in all of these countries. We're talking about Burkina Faso, of course, Mali, Niger, all of whom have thrown out the French in recent years. And it's quite unusual amongst colonial powers that France, for very many years, kept military bases in its former colonies, of course, with the acquiescence of those former colonies. By the end of this year, the only one that will remain will be in Djibouti, right over near the Horn of Africa. All of those bases, which were useful to France and useful at different times, different Western Central African leaders asked for them to come in and push back jihadists. That is now over. For now. It's a very complicated relationship. It's very difficult always for any colonial power, France, to separate defending its own commercial interests, because there were very significant French commercial interests in all of these countries after France left. And any opportunity to defend their own French commercial interests, big banks, big oil companies, is going to be attractive to the French government. But they were invited into Niger, to Mali, to push back jihadists, and French soldiers lost their lives in that, several years long operation, particularly to try to push back jihadists. And a lot of French people think, well, French soldiers lost their lives. If you don't want us, that's fine. That's the reality. It's a moving relationship, and there is a bad relationship at the moment between France and many of its former colonies in Africa.
All right.
If other African countries were to adopt similar strategies, would it disrupt the entire architecture of resource dependency? And could this be the moment when the continent finally shapes its own economic narrative, rather than having it shaped for them? Only a few days after the uranium market announcement, another major development followed. on the 4th of December 2025, Niger publicly declared its intention to take legal action against Orano, the French nuclear company operating in Niger for decades. Reports indicated allegations concerning environmental pollution, radioactive risks, and long unresolved issues linked to industrial waste. For years, civil society groups inside and outside Niger have raised concerns about environmental impact, but official state-level legal pressure of this magnitude is historically rare. The announcement marked a shift from informal complaints to formal accountability.
See, in a statement released on November 27, 2025, the French group Orano expresses its condemnation of the illegal transport of uranium stored at the SOMAИR site as if it were its property.
This statement, to say the least, surprising.
Reveals the true face of Orano, that of a predator having lost its prey and who continues to consider all-powerful, as he claims to be, that the Nigerian mines are its property within Nigerian territory, going so far as to deny any intelligence to the Nigerian framework to execute according to the rules of the art the acts of packaging, protection, and transportation of these strategic products. Orano seems in total disarray to have forgotten that the highest Nigerian authorities in a patriotic and sovereignist surge have nationalized the mining companies that are from the returns in the national heritage after several decades of plundering and crimes committed against the environment, the health of the populations, and the Nigerian economy. This disarray is moreover illustrated by a decision from the service on which Orano bases itself to claim rights that it acknowledges having lost. In its condescension and while persisting in its claims, Orano arrogates the right to take actions that infringe on the sovereignty and integrity of our country, as evidenced by the discovery in Madaola, a lit department, of about 400 barrels containing radioactive core, a highly toxic material whose exposure endangers the lives and health of Nigerians. This discovery, to say the least surprising, speaks volumes about Orano's disdain for Niger and its people since the beginning of uranium mining. Indeed, according to the geological field study, the dose measurements taken on these materials reveal a toxicity level ranging from 7 to 10 microsieverts per hour, while the normal dose is 0.5 microsieverts.
What drove Niger to escalate at this moment? And is this a sign that African states are moving towards stronger regulatory and legal oversight over foreign corporations operating on their soil? The legal challenge raises critical questions about environmental justice. If environmental harm is proven, it raises deeper concerns about the long-term health impact on communities living around uranium-rich regions.
Guys, we have a court case in Niamey, Niger, to file against the French multinational called Orano, which has been milking Niger's uranium for over 70 years. Over 70 years, they have been milking Niger's uranium. And as I told you a couple of weeks back, that they had taken Niger to court because Niger blatantly kicked them out of the country and confiscated their licenses, banned them from anything, nationalizing those mines. Do you know what those monsters did? They voluntarily, in some of their mines, allowed waste uranium, which is enriched and having radioactive emissions, in the open air. And you know what their goal was? So that it will begin to poison the people who reside around the mine, which is somewhere around the northern part of Niger. So that the emissions will begin to poison and kill our brothers and sisters, our mothers, our fathers, our grandfathers, our grandmothers, our little babies in northern Niger. Can you see how demonic? When I keep saying here that France and all their multinational companies and their politics and their policies have never meant good in any way for Africans, some people think that we are just talking for talking's sake. How can you decide to unalive innocent people in their thousands that way just because they asked you to vacate the country? Whereas you have been benefiting from their uranium for 70 years and you have never built a single nuclear reactor for them. While you guys make your cities to be illuminated, Niger is in absolute darkness, begging Nigeria for electricity. And when they decided to take their destiny into their hands, Nigeria cut power supply from them and mothers died in the hospitals. Women who were giving birth died in the hospitals. Little babies who were in incubators died in the hospitals. Why? Because France has been ripping them off, making their cities to be electrified and even distributing electricity and energy to other European countries, while Nigerians are wallowing in darkness. What else apart from witchcraft and wickedness personified can we qualify these monsters? This is so terrible. So that is the reason why the government of Niger, as announced by the Minister of Justice, Ali Daouda, a plan to sue Orano for all these points that I have enumerated, and also for negligence, for disrespecting the courts of Niger, because they had given them several injunctions and obligations. They completely disrespected both the country's authorities and the courts. With all these reasons, the government of Niger is taking Orano to court, because they have decided that they will not keep denouncing them verbally, but they have to take, punitive or legal action against France and its multinational, so that it will be at the level of the international bodies that this is what these companies did to the people of Niger and to the entire nation as a whole. Let me know what you think in the comment section. Thank you so much and see you in my next one.
For decades, many Africans have questioned whether multinational extractive companies apply the same safety standards in Africa that they apply in Europe. This moment forces attention on that question. If the allegations stand, will this set a precedent for environmental accountability across Africa? And if it does, how will multinational corporations operating on the continent respond to the increasing demand for transparency and responsibility? As this analysis concludes, viewers are encouraged to support the continued production of in-depth news breakdowns by joining the channel membership or sending a super thanks contribution. Such support allows the channel to continue delivering long-form, professional geopolitical analysis grounded in facts, timelines, and critical interpretation. The conversation now moves to the comment section, where every respectful contribution enriches the ongoing discussion around these complex developments. Disclaimer: this video is for news analysis and informational purposes only. It does not endorse any government, political leader, political agenda, or geopolitical action. All viewpoints presented are based on publicly available reports and timeline-verified events. Viewers are encouraged to conduct independent research and engage responsibly.